A 21-year-old woman sits in a drawing room with swollen eyes, shaking hands, and milk still staining her dress from a newborn she will never raise. She names the Prince of Wales as her lover, but within months, her own family will declare her insane. She will not be seen in public for 36 years. Was she mad, or was she silenced? Harriet Mordaunt did not choose her life. It was chosen for her, wrapped in silk, and sealed before she turned 19. Born in 1848 on a sprawling Highland estate in Perthshire, Scotland, Harriet was the daughter of Sir Thomas Mordaunt, a baronet with old blood, good land, and the kind of social ambition that treated daughters less like people and more like currency. That bidder arrived in 1866. His name was Sir Charles Mordaunt, the 10th baronet of a Warwickshire dynasty and a sitting Conservative member of Parliament. He had Walton Hall, a country estate large enough to lose yourself in. He had political connections. He had money. What he did not have, apparently, was personality. Harriet was 18. Charles was 29. They married that same year. And just like that, a teenager from the Scottish Highlands became Lady Mordaunt of Walton Hall, wife to a member of Parliament, and part of one of the most ill-connected social circles in England. Now, here is where it gets interesting. Because the structure of an aristocratic marriage in Victorian England was not designed around companionship. It was designed around access. Sir Charles spent much of his time in London for Parliament, or out on shooting weekends, or buried in the business of managing his estates. Harriet, meanwhile, was left at Walton Hall with the servants, the silence, and an open calendar. But she was not isolated. She was connected. The Mordaunts moved in circles that orbited the very top of British society. House parties, hunting weekends, country estates where the champagne flowed and the guest lists read like a roll call of the aristocracy. This was the Gilded Age of the British upper class, and Harriet had a front row seat. To be fair, nobody warned her. Nobody sat Harriet Mordaunt down before her wedding and explained that the world she was marrying into ran on one simple rule. You could do almost anything behind closed doors, as long as you never, under any circumstances, acknowledged it in daylight. Discretion was not just expected, it was survival. Harriet would learn this lesson, but not before she broke it in the most spectacular way imaginable. And by then, the damage would be permanent. The heir to the British throne had a hobby, and it was not stamp collecting. Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, known to his inner circle as Bertie, was Queen Victoria's eldest son and the man who would one day wear the crown. But in the 1860s, that crown was still decades away, and Bertie had time to kill. So he filled it with women, banquets, horse races, and an ever-rotating carousel of house parties where the guest list was glamorous and the moral standards were flexible. To put this in perspective, Queen Victoria essentially barred Bertie from any meaningful political role. She blamed him, somewhat unfairly, for the death of his father, Prince Albert, who had fallen ill shortly after confronting Bertie over a scandal involving an actress. The Queen's solution was to keep her son ornamental, smile at state functions, wave from carriages, do nothing of consequence. Naturally, Bertie filled that void with pleasure, and he was spectacularly good at it. His social circle operated like a private club with no written rules and one unwritten commandment. Whatever happens at the country house stays at the country house. Bertie surrounded himself with young aristocrats, military officers, and, crucially, their wives. The women in Bertie's orbit understood the arrangement. You could enjoy the prince's attention, his charm, his influence, and the reflected glow of proximity to the throne. All it cost was your silence. Now here is where Harriet Mordaunt enters the picture. After her marriage to Sir Charles, she was almost immediately absorbed into this social universe. Sir Charles himself had connections to men in Bertie's set, and the couple attended gatherings where the prince was present. The most significant of these was Abergeldy Castle, a royal retreat near Balmoral in Scotland, where Bertie hosted intimate parties away from the press and his mother's disapproving gaze. It was through these gatherings that Harriet became acquainted with two other men whose names would later burn through the front pages of every newspaper in England: Viscount Lowry Cole and Sir Frederick Johnstone. Both were fixtures in Bertie's circle. Both were young, titled, and socially reckless, and both would eventually be named by Harriet as men she had been intimate with. But that revelation was still years away. In the late 1860s, Harriet was simply a beautiful young wife, enjoying the world her marriage had opened to her. She attended the parties. She charmed the rooms. She moved through the most exclusive social circles in the British Empire with the ease of someone who belonged there. The problem, of course, was that belonging to Bertie's circle came with a hidden price tag. And the same discretion that protected everyone also trapped them. As long as nobody spoke, the system worked perfectly. But if someone broke, if someone confessed, the machinery that protected reputations would pivot instantly and become the machinery that destroyed them. Harriet had no idea she was building the bomb that would obliterate her own life. Not yet. In February of 1869, Harriet Mordaunt gave birth to a daughter, and that is when her entire world began to collapse. The child was named Violet. By all accounts, the delivery itself was unremarkable by Victorian standards, but within days, something went wrong. The infant developed a severe eye infection, the kind that in the 19th century could lead to permanent blindness if untreated. Doctors were summoned. Treatments were attempted. And Harriet, watching her newborn suffer, spiraled into a terror that would consume everything she had built. Here is why. In Victorian medicine, one of the known causes of eye infections in newborns was a specific type of transmission from the mother during birth. The condition, called ophthalmia neonatorum, was associated with certain intimate diseases that a mother could unknowingly pass to her child. Harriet, whether through conversations with her doctors or through her own reading, connected the dots. If Violet's eyes were infected, it might mean Harriet herself carried a disease. And if Harriet carried that disease, it had not come from her husband. Now, historians have debated for over a century whether Harriet's medical reasoning was sound, or whether it was the product of a mind already fracturing under the weight of postpartum distress. Now, the truth is, we cannot know for certain. Ophthalmia in newborns had multiple causes, and the diagnostic tools of 1869 were crude at best. It is entirely possible that Violet's infection was ordinary and unrelated to anything Harriet feared. But Harriet did not have the luxury of hindsight. She had a sick baby, a guilty conscience, and a mounting conviction that the evidence of her private life was now written on her daughter's face for anyone with medical knowledge to read. The psychological pressure must have been extraordinary. Remember, this was a 21-year-old woman in a society where reputation was everything. She had no career to fall back on, no independent income, no legal rights over her own children. If the truth came out on someone else's terms, then she would be destroyed without even the dignity of controlling the narrative. And so Harriet made a decision that, depending on your interpretation, was either the bravest or the most self-destructive act of any woman in Victorian England. She decided to tell her husband herself. What followed was not a measured conversation between two adults working through a crisis. It was an unraveling. Harriet did not merely hint at indiscretion. She did not offer a carefully worded, partial truth designed to minimize damage. She opened her mouth and let everything pour out, names included, in what would become the most catastrophic confession in 19th century British high society. She was about to hand Sir Charles Mordaunt a loaded weapon, and he was absolutely going to use it. Harriet did not whisper. She did not hedge. She detonated. And standing before her husband at Walton Hall, still recovering from childbirth, still terrified about her daughter's condition, Harriet told Sir Charles Mordaunt that she had done wrong. Those were her words, and then she kept going. She said she had been unfaithful, often and in open day. Not once, not a single regrettable lapse in judgment. Often, in daylight, while servants moved through hallways and guests filled the drawing rooms of country estates across England. And then she named the men: Viscount Lowry Cole, Sir Frederick Johnstone, and the Prince of Wales. Let that settle for a moment. A 21-year-old woman in a society where wives had fewer legal rights than their husbands' hunting dogs, voluntarily confessed to adultery with multiple men, one of whom was the future King of England. This was not a slip of the tongue, and this was a wrecking ball swung directly at the most powerful social structure on Earth. You might be wondering why. Why confess at all? And the answer, depending on which historian you ask, breaks in two directions. The first explanation is guilt. Harriet believed her daughter's illness was the physical consequence of her own actions, and the weight of that belief broke her open. She could not carry the secret while watching Violet suffer. The second explanation is that Harriet was already in the grip of what 19th century medicine called puerperal mania, a severe form of postpartum psychosis that could produce paranoia, delusions, and compulsive confessional behavior. Under this reading, Harriet was not making a rational decision. She was symptomatic. Both interpretations would be weaponized in the months to come. Sir Charles, yet for his part, did not respond with compassion. He did not ask his wife if she needed a doctor. He did not hold her hand. What he did was leave the room, contact his solicitors, and begin assembling the legal architecture of a divorce petition. Within weeks, he had also done something remarkably aggressive. He searched Harriet's personal belongings and found letters, cards, and valentines from several of the men she had named, including correspondence from the Prince of Wales himself. Nothing in those letters proved an affair explicitly. Bertie was far too careful for that. But they proved proximity, familiarity, and a warmth that would be very difficult to explain away in a public courtroom. By the end of 1869, Sir Charles had filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery, naming Cole and Johnstone as co-respondents. And the palace intervened to keep the prince from being formally named, but his shadow loomed over every page of the petition. The gears of the British legal system began to turn, and Harriet, the woman who had spoken, was about to discover what Victorian England did to women who refused to stay quiet. It was not gentle. February of 1870. London. The divorce court on the Strand. And every seat in the gallery is taken. The Mordaunt trial had been generating headlines for weeks before it even opened, but the reason the public was truly electrified had nothing to do with Sir Charles, nothing to do with Harriet, and everything to do with the man who had just been subpoenaed as a witness. The Prince of Wales, heir to the throne of the British Empire, was about to be questioned under oath about his relationship with another man's wife. Nothing like this had happened before, and the palace knew exactly how dangerous it was. Behind the scenes, a furious campaign had been waged to limit the damage. Bertie's lawyers successfully blocked him from being named as a co-respondent, meaning he would not stand accused of adultery alongside Cole and Johnstone. He would merely testify, merely answer questions, merely sit in a witness box in full public view while a barrister asked him whether he had been intimate with Harriet Mordaunt. The word merely was doing extraordinary heavy lifting. When Bertie took the stand, the courtroom reportedly fell into absolute silence. Here was the son of Queen Victoria, the man who would one day be crowned king, being asked the kind of question that could fracture the monarchy's moral authority. The barrister was direct. But had there ever been any improper familiarity between the prince and Lady Mordaunt? Bertie's answer was 7 words. There has been nothing improper between us. The gallery murmured. The press scribbled. And that, officially, was that. No follow-up interrogation. No confrontational cross-examination. The prince was treated with a deference that bordered on reverence. He stepped down, left the court, and was reportedly greeted with applause by sympathetic crowds outside. The next day, he attended a London theater as though nothing had happened. But the denial convinced almost no one who understood how Bertie's world actually worked. His letters to Harriet had already been entered into evidence. Witnesses had placed them together at Abergeldy on multiple occasions. His reputation as a serial philanderer was not a rumor, as it was practically a national institution. The court, however, was not interested in testing the prince's credibility. The system needed his denial to hold, so it held. What the trial did expose, with brutal clarity, was the power imbalance at the center of this story. Bertie walked away untouched. Cole and Johnstone, though embarrassed, would recover socially within a few years. Sir Charles would emerge as the wronged husband, dignity intact. And Harriet? The woman whose confession had started all of this? She was not even permitted to speak in her own defense, because by the time the prince finished testifying, a different legal strategy had already been deployed. One that would silence Harriet Mordaunt far more effectively than any courtroom verdict ever could. Her own family had declared her insane, that the people who were supposed to protect Harriet Mordaunt were the ones who buried her alive. When Sir Charles filed for divorce, the Moncrief family faced a brutal calculation. If Harriet was sane, her confession stood. If her confession stood, every detail would be picked apart in open court. Every name, every encounter, every letter. The Prince of Wales would be dragged deeper into the scandal. And the Moncriefs, who had spent generations climbing the social ladder of the Scottish and British aristocracy, would be forever associated with the woman who publicly humiliated the future King of England. So they chose a different path. They argued that Harriet was not responsible for her words because she had lost her mind. The legal term was puerperalmania. Today, while we would recognize the condition as a severe form of postpartum psychosis, a genuine and well-documented psychiatric illness that can follow childbirth. Symptoms include hallucinations, paranoia, confusion, and in some cases, compulsive speech or confessional behavior. It was real. It was medically recognized even in the 19th century, and it was the perfect shield. Here is what made the strategy so devastatingly effective. The Moncriefs did not need to prove that Harriet was permanently insane. They only needed to prove she was unfit to participate in the trial. If she could not plead, the divorce could not proceed. If the divorce could not proceed, no official verdict on adultery would ever be rendered. The accusations would float in legal limbo, unresolved, and therefore officially unconfirmed, Everyone would be protected. Now the prince, the aristocrats, the family name. Everyone except Harriet. Doctors were brought in. Testimony was given. Medical experts debated whether Harriet's behavior after childbirth was consistent with puerperal mania. Some said yes, others were less certain. Sir Charles's legal team pushed back, arguing that Harriet had been perfectly lucid when she confessed, and that the insanity claim was a convenient fiction designed to obstruct the divorce. After 7 days of hearings, the jury sided with the Moncriefs. Harriet was declared unfit to plead or defend herself. The divorce petition was dismissed. No finding of adultery was entered against anyone. Sir Charles walked away with his grievance, but no legal resolution. Bertie walked away with his reputation technically intact. Cole and Johnstone walked away unnamed in any verdict. Jen and Harriet walked away with nothing. Actually, she did not walk away at all, because the insanity ruling did not just end the trial. It redefined her entire legal existence. She was no longer a wife, a mother, or a witness. She was a certified lunatic. And in Victorian England, that designation carried consequences that lasted far beyond any courtroom. The Moncriefs had saved the family honor. They had shielded the monarchy, and they had handed their own daughter a life sentence without a single criminal charge. The cell was already being prepared. After the trial ended, Harriet Mordaunt did not go home. She did not go anywhere anyone would ever see her again. The mechanics of her removal were quiet and efficient. No public announcement, no dramatic scene at the courthouse steps, and that she was simply transferred from Walton Hall to a privately rented house under the supervision of appointed attendants. Then another house, then another, and eventually into the network of private lunatic asylums that served as Victorian England's most discreet solution for inconvenient people. And here is what makes this chapter of Harriet's life so chilling. It was not hidden because it was shameful. It was hidden because the system was designed to be invisible. Private asylums in the 19th century were not public hospitals. They were businesses. Wealthy families paid handsomely to place relatives in secluded country houses, staffed by doctors and nurses, where patients could be kept comfortable, medicated, and above all, silent. There were no public records of admission that made their way into newspapers. There was no visitor logs that historians can easily access. No requirement that the patient consent to being there. For a woman already declared legally insane by a court, there was no mechanism for appeal. No process by which Harriet could challenge her confinement. No independent review board knocking on the door every few years to ask whether she still belonged there. Once the paperwork was signed, the door closed. And it stayed closed. Harriet Mordaunt entered this system in 1870. She would not leave it until she was dead. 36 years, consider that number. It is longer than most prison sentences for violent crimes today. Harriet spent it moving between institutions, attended by strangers, cut off from the society that had once celebrated her beauty and her charm. No photographs of her from this period have survived, and no letters written by her hand have entered the public record. No journalist interviewed her. No friend published a memoir describing a visit. She became, for all practical purposes, a ghost with a pulse. The question that historians have wrestled with ever since is straightforward, but unanswerable. Was she actually insane? Puerperal mania is real, and it can be severe. Some women in the 19th century did experience prolonged psychiatric illness following childbirth. It is possible that Harriet genuinely suffered a breakdown from which she never fully recovered. But it is equally possible that a woman who was temporarily unwell was permanently confined because releasing her would have reopened a scandal that powerful people had spent considerable effort to bury. In Victorian England, with the line between "this woman needs help" and "this woman needs to be silenced" was dangerously thin. And once you crossed it, there was almost no coming back. Harriet's daughter Violet grew up without her mother. Sir Charles remained at Walton Hall. The Prince of Wales continued attending parties. And somewhere behind the walls of a private asylum, a woman who had once danced at royal gatherings sat in a room that history forgot. While Harriet Mordaunt sat in an asylum, every man connected to her scandal went on to live exactly the life he wanted. Start with the prince. Bertie did not slow down after the trial. If anything, the Mordaunt affair barely registered as a speed bump in his social calendar. Within weeks of testifying, he was back at the races, back at the dinner parties, or back in the company of beautiful women whose names would surface in future scandals. The Mordaunt case taught him nothing about discretion and everything about invincibility. When you are the heir to the throne, denial is not just a strategy. It is a privilege that renews itself every morning. Viscount Lowry Cole, one of the men Harriet had named directly, weathered the embarrassment with the resilience that came standard with an aristocratic title. He continued his military career, eventually rising to prominence, and married respectably. The scandal became a footnote, the kind of youthful indiscretion that society forgave in men as easily as it condemned in women. Sir Frederick Johnstone followed a similar trajectory, briefly notorious, quickly forgotten. He remained in Bertie's social orbit for years afterward, which tells you everything about how seriously the prince's circle took the accusations. Being named in a married woman's adultery confession was, for these men, roughly equivalent to receiving a bad review at a gentleman's club. Unpleasant, but survivable. And then there was Sir Charles Mordaunt, the wronged husband, the man who had filed for divorce and watched it collapse under the weight of the insanity defense. He did not accept the outcome quietly. In 1874, 4 years after the original trial, Charles mounted a second attempt to divorce Harriet. This time, the courts permitted it, largely because the question of her sanity was no longer the central issue. The marriage was finally dissolved, but Sir Charles never remarried. He returned to Walton Hall, managed his estates, sat in Parliament, and lived the quiet life of a man who had been publicly humiliated and chose to retreat rather than rebuild. He died in 1897 at the age of 60. By then, Harriet had already been confined for 27 years. She would outlive him by nearly a decade without ever knowing he was gone. What makes this chapter of the story so quietly devastating is the asymmetry. Every person who participated in the events of 1869 had options. Bertie had the crown. Cole and Johnstone had their titles. Sir Charles had his estate and his seat in Parliament. Even the Moncrieff family had their reputation, carefully preserved by sacrificing their daughter. Harriet had nothing. No title, no estate, no allies, no voice. The world she had briefly scandalized moved on without her, and nobody with the power to reopen her case ever saw a reason to try. The Victorian machine had done what it was built to do. It had protected the powerful, punished the vulnerable, and called the whole arrangement justice. Harriet, presumably, was not consulted on the terminology. In 1901, the man who swore under oath that nothing improper had happened became King of England. In 1906, the woman he swore about died in an asylum. The timing was poetic in the cruelest possible way. Queen Victoria passed away on January 22, 1901, after a reign that had lasted 63 years. Bertie, now 60 years old, finally received the crown he had spent his entire adult life waiting for. He was coronated as King Edward VII, ruler of the British Empire and its dominions, defender of the faith, and, unofficially, the most prolific royal philanderer since Charles II. The coronation was a spectacle. Dignitaries from across the globe attended. The streets of London were lined with cheering subjects. The press published glowing tributes to the new monarch, and not a single newspaper mentioned Harriet Mordaunt. Why would they? The trial had taken place over 3 decades earlier. The scandal was ancient history. The woman at the center of it had been erased so completely that most of the public had forgotten she ever existed. But she did exist. While Bertie adjusted to his new throne, Harriet was still alive, still confined, still moving through the silent corridors of private institutions that had become the only world she knew. She was 53 years old in 1901. She had been locked away since she was 22, and more than half her life had been spent in rooms she did not choose, attended by people she did not select, governed by a legal designation she could not challenge. Whether she was aware of Bertie's coronation is unknown. Whether she understood what was happening in the outside world at all is unclear. The records from her decades of confinement are sparse to the point of non-existence. We do not know what she looked like in her final years. We do not know if she spoke about the past. We do not know if anyone ever told her that her ex-husband had died 4 years before the coronation, or that her daughter Violet had grown into adulthood without her. What we do know is this. On May 9, 1906, Harriet Sarah Mordaunt died in Sutton, Surrey. She was 58 years old. The cause of death was recorded as liver and kidney failure, but there was no grand funeral, no public mourning, no obituary that treated her as anything more than a footnote to a scandal the world had already moved past. She was buried in Brompton Cemetery in London. Bertie outlived her by 4 years. He died in 1910, mourned by an empire, and remembered as a king who, despite his flaws, had charmed a nation. Biographies were written. Monuments were raised. His affairs were treated as colorful footnotes to a distinguished reign. Harriet received no biography, no monument, no colorful footnotes, just a grave in a London cemetery and a name that most people only encounter when reading about someone else's story, usually his. Harriet Mordaunt's real crime had nothing to do with what she did in private. It was what she did out loud. Let us be clear about what Victorian England actually punished in 1870. It was not adultery. Half the aristocracy was conducting affairs behind drawing room doors, and the system functioned beautifully as long as everyone maintained the performance. Bertie himself collected mistresses the way lesser men collected pocket watches, and society responded with knowing smiles and turned heads. Adultery was the national pastime of the upper class. Confession was the unforgivable act. Harriet broke the one rule that held the entire structure together. She spoke. She named names. She pointed at the future King of England and said he was part of it. And for that, she was not simply punished. She was unmade. Think about the precision of what happened to her. She was not imprisoned by enemies. She was committed by her own parents. She was not silenced by the crown. She was silenced by a medical diagnosis that her own family requested. The system did not need to conspire in dark rooms. It simply did what it always does when a vulnerable person threatens powerful ones. It reclassified her. She was not a whistleblower. She was a lunatic. She was not telling the truth. She was having an episode. The language changed, and with it, her entire reality. And the most unsettling part? We still cannot say with certainty which version is true. Postpartum psychosis is real. It devastates women to this day. Harriet may genuinely have suffered a severe psychiatric break that distorted her judgment and loosened her grip on reality. That possibility deserves honest acknowledgement. But it is equally true that her diagnosis arrived at the most politically convenient moment imaginable, delivered by a family with every incentive to discredit her testimony, and accepted by a court that had every reason to make the problem disappear. Harriet Mordaunt lived for 36 years after her trial. She died at 58. She never reclaimed her name, her children, or her story. The men she accused prospered. The institutions she threatened endured. And history, for the most part, recorded her as a tragic footnote in someone else's biography. But here is what history often misses. Harriet was 21 years old when she sat in that drawing room and told the truth as she understood it. She had no lawyer coaching her, no publicist managing the fallout, no support system waiting to catch her. She simply opened her mouth and refused to pretend. In a world built entirely on pretending, that was the most dangerous thing a woman could do. She was not mad because she confessed. She was declared mad because the alternative was believing her. And that question, more than a century later, still does not have a comfortable answer. So that's it for today. If this story unsettled you, don't forget to click the like button so that more people can find it. And if you want more stories about the people history tried to bury, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the past is full of voices that were silenced, and somebody ought to turn the volume back up.